Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Batanya Gibson and I'm the Director of Community College and Transfer Student Engagement at Common App. Before we get started, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording and the presentation slides will be mailed to all registrants 24 hours following the conclusion of the webinar. Towards the end of the presentation, we will host a panel discussion and a QA session. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance when you registered. And feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation in the QA tab, which can be found to the right of your screen. You can also upvote questions you'd like speakers to respond to. Lastly, we encourage you to submit your feedback on today's webinar. You can submit your feedback by completing the survey located in the panel to the right of your screen. So we'll start with introductions. Again, my name is Batanya Gibson. I've been at Common App for close to 4 years now, working to support community college and transfer students in the application process. I have a background working with adult students at both the 2 and 4 year levels. And I've seen firsthand the impacts of institutional barriers to a student's ability to succeed in higher education. I was also a student parent, raising twins while completing my graduate degree. I will pass to Brittany to introduce herself.
Thank you, Batanya, and greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Brittany Williams. And before I was the Director of Advocacy, Policy, and Research here at Generation Hope, I too was a parenting student in my undergraduate tenure. I am the mother of 3 sons who have now seen me through 3 degrees. And so I bring that to my work here at Generation Hope, a national nonprofit that works to ensure all student parents have the opportunities to succeed, experience economic mobility, and build wealth. I've worked for over 15 years in higher education in administration, practice, policy, and research at the institutional, state, and federal level. I look forward to conversing with you all today. And with that, I'll pass it to my co-panelist, Dr. Teresa Anderson.
Thank you so much, Brittany, and thank you so much to Batanya and to Common App for having us with you all today. I'm Teresa Anderson. I'm a Principal Research Associate at the Urban Institute, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy and research organization based in Washington, D.C. I've been at Urban for 12 years now, and my work is around promoting education access and success throughout the life course from early childhood to adulthood, thinking especially about holistic family well-being and opportunities for mobility through education. My background is in social safety net research. I worked at U.S. Department of Agriculture on food assistance policy for several years. And this focus on parenting students has been and become a real passion of mine. It started with my dissertation work on moms who go back to school when my older son was born while I was in the midst of that process. But I always say that I was more of a student parent at the end than going all the way through. I'm now a mom of 2 kids I live in Arlington, Virginia, and really excited to be able to share some insights about how to support pregnant and parenting students and be able to promote academic success and intergenerational mobility. And with that, I will pass that to Dr. Joyce Ann Rogers to round out our panel.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here today and great to be part of this amazing panel of folks. As Teresa said, my name is Dr. Joyce Ann Rogers. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Contemporary Student Services at George Mason University, which is a Research 1 minority-serving institution in Fairfax, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. Mason is a Common App member and a Family U SEAL recipient. My background before coming to Mason, my research was around mitigating and eliminating barriers, particularly for post-traditional students and contemporary students here at Mason. So I will pass it back to Batanya to lead us into the content for today.
Thank you, Joyce Ann. You can see by the panel that we have a lot of expertise and we're really excited about this conversation. But before starting, I want to reground us in Common App's mission and vision. I like taking time to do that because it reminds us of why Common App is actually doing this work. So here you'll see our mission. We continue to be committed to the pursuit of access, equity, and integrity in the college admissions process. Our vision is, of course, to be the trusted source to access, afford, and attain opportunity for all. We are happy that since 2019, low-income applicants have increased at least 3 times the rate of higher income applicants in Common App. But while this is true, they're significantly underrepresented in our applicant pool. Because of that, we recognize that there is an opportunity for us to be more impactful. Sorry about that. Our moonshot goal was created to work along with our members to help address this. Our moonshot goal is to close the equity gap in students pursuing higher education by 2030. It's a lofty goal, and it's going to take a multifaceted approach to get there. And here's how. Right now, we're working to get there by using our unique data, relationships, and innovative solutions. We are ensuring that our application process allows students to claim agency over their journey. We're connecting students to the resources that address financial barriers to their education. And lastly, but certainly not least, by empowering you, our Common App members and partners, with insight to help advance your organization's mission. I encourage everyone to visit our next chapter page. The link is here on this slide to learn more about this important initiative at Common App. So with this framing, we're all here today to get a better understanding of who student parents are, why their success matters, and how Common App can help you better serve them. Currently, Common App is one of the few national sources of data on parenting students. The household question, which can be found in our first year application, has been added to the Common App for transfer as of the 2024-2025 cycle. The question itself is simple. Do you have any children, and how many? And it's not perfect, as the panelists here will explain, but it does give many institutions some of the insight they need to identify and serve these students. As for Common App, the data has revealed some interesting insights. Urban Institute cited the national statistic that parenting students are disproportionately less likely to submit an application. Among the applicant numbers we know that over 12,000 students applied in the 23-24 cycle. These are students who submitted at least one application and who were also willing to answer the parenting question. We see how many students applied, but we also know that not every student on the Common Application who created an account submitted an application. In fact, across Common App in the 23-24 cycle, only 57% of all account creators submitted at least one application. That's why we want to make sure that we provide support to parenting students who are interested in applying as soon as they get on the platform. So with that, we're going to move to our panel discussion. And we're going to get started with the question let's start with Teresa. From your work, why are student parents important as a focus group for a focus population for colleges?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that question. And I actually really love this kind of framing because there's so many reasons that student parents are a really important and intersectional population for colleges to focus on. The first thing is that if you look at the intersection of student parent characteristics, they are about 70% of student parents are female, but 30% are male. They are more likely to be veterans. They're more likely to be first generation college students. And they are at the center, they're more likely to be Pell eligible. They're at the center of a lot of the groups that we care about in higher education, in being able to promote access. So if you want to show the slide about payoffs to mothers, for some reason, I apologize. My webinar is frozen, so I can't see which slide you're showing. Tanya, could you clarify which is up?
I have the payoffs for mothers. That's up now.
Fabulous. Thank you. I'm sorry I can't see it, but I can talk about it. So the first point is that there are important benefits to student parents themselves. So I mentioned that my dissertation research looked at moms who go back to school, and this is some of the findings from that research on a large longitudinal study. And if you look on the left here, you'll see that mothers who re-enroll in school see earnings benefits, but they don't see benefits in household income. They see lower rates of marriage, and they see somewhat higher depression scores at age 50. And the marriage patterns are kind of complicated. It's common for women to go back to school when their marriage is ending, or for them going back to school to put pressure on otherwise sort of traditional or patriarchal marriages, or sometimes moms who aren't married might have a harder time finding a partner that kind of matches their trajectory. So there is a common thread that they're less likely to be married, and because of that, their household income on average is a little bit lower, even though their personal earnings increase. The important thing is that if you look on the right here, you'll see that mothers who re-enroll and complete a college degree see much larger, about 3 times as high earnings gains each year after they complete. They don't see any decline in household income, even though they see those same marriage patterns, and they don't see negative effects on mental health. So not only is it important for student parents, and in this case specifically mothers because of the nature of the data that we looked at, to enroll in school, but to be supported in completing their degree. If we look at the payoffs for children, we also see in the next slide, we see that there's intergenerational benefits. So children of mothers who re-enroll in school, even for just by the fact of re-enrolling, see gains in verbal and reading scores, and they see somewhat higher probability of completing high school, about 2% more likely to complete high school, 10% more likely to enroll in college, and 16% more likely to get a college degree. They don't see earnings gains in the long run, but they also don't see those impacts on marriage that we mentioned with their mothers. So this isn't like an intergenerational negative marriage effect. When their mothers are supported in completing degrees, not only do we see larger gains in verbal and reading scores, but we see much higher probabilities that those children themselves are going to complete high school, 9% more likely, 21% more likely to enroll in college, and 38% more likely to get a college degree. So this is huge for intergenerational educational mobility. And we also see that those children, when they grow up in early adulthood, see earnings gains as well for the fact that their mothers were able to complete their degree. So this is a large intergenerational mobility effect. We also see, if we go to the next slide, payoffs for states and for taxpayers. So we did a separate return on investment analysis looking at Virginia and saw that 3 different interventions to support student parents pay off for taxpayers in the most narrow way you can define payoff, which is increased tax revenue and decreased benefits. If you counted all the intergenerational effects and all the effects on families, it would be huge, but just in a very narrow sense, that offering a comprehensive student parent support program on each public campus, offering a grant aid program of about $3,000 annually for student parents who are below poverty, or offering on-campus childcare, which is an expensive but very effective solution to support student parents. All of them had a net payoff in the most narrow way of defining that payoff. And I'm happy to share more about this if folks have questions. We also see, if we go to this next slide, that parents without college degrees are a large potential recruitment population for colleges. So we've seen the benefits for families, we've seen the benefits for states, and there's also benefits for colleges, especially as we're facing recruitment challenges. So there are over 36 million parents of minor children who do not have a bachelor's degree in the US who are not currently enrolled in school. So, and 45%, almost half of them, have some college experience, but they're not in school now. So if we're thinking about populations to reach out to in communities and that colleges can be better serving, this is a very large one that could be meaningful. And finally, I just wanted to mention that this is motivating legislative change. So we've seen student parent data collection legislation and other student parent supports become mandated across different states. Michigan did a 1-year collection, which got rolled back, but they're exploring what the next might look like. But Oregon and Illinois in 2021, California in 2022, Texas in 2023, and in Minnesota and California again with additional legislation in 2024, have passed bills in their state legislatures around either collecting data on students' parenting status, giving student parents priority registration, or providing navigator or liaison supports or other protections for student parents. Maryland also explored a bill in 2023 that may come back around. So I've given kind of the reasons, and we also see that state legislatures are agreeing that supporting student parents really, really matters.
Thank you, Teresa. That was great insight, especially on the legislative side of this. I want to turn that same question to Brittany to get your insight.
Yes, thank you. Here at Generation Hope, our mission aligns with this very notion of this question by empowering parenting students to achieve college goals and experience that upward mobility. And so I'll echo a lot of what Teresa just shared in that, student parents are an important focus population for colleges because they represent a large and underserved group of students that face unique challenges through degree completion, yet their success has far-reaching benefits for both their families and society. Addressing their needs through targeted supports directly impacts intergenerational mobility. And Teresa talked about that intergenerational benefit from that end. Also here at Generation Hope, we believe that focusing on student parents promotes intersectional equity. Teresa shared a little bit of data, and while we know that, student parents are navigating, not just one, but multiple intersecting identities. And so as we think about gender and race and income, in intersection with their caregiving responsibilities, all of those things make completing a degree, or it can make completing a degree more difficult. And so while centering the needs of parenting students on college campuses, institutions can address broader inequities that disproportionately impact marginalized populations on their campus and really create a more inclusive higher education system for students to persist through.
Thank you, Brittany. That's great insight. And I think I want to go over to Joyce Ann for the same question. Why are student parents important as a focus population for colleges, speaking as a Common App member college?
Absolutely. Thank you, Batania. I think one of the things that you're going to hear all of us say throughout this entire presentation is echoing across each other and backing up with data and experiences what each other is saying. And that is because we don't and can't do this work alone. It's in conjunction with things like this and sharing across that we do this. Because as mentioned, student parents are a growing population for us as higher education professionals, and they have unique needs, and it's important to know and to meet those needs. You heard that nationally 1 in 5 undergraduate students is a student parent. In Virginia, where Mason is, that number's 1 in 4. And one of Mason's values as an innovative and inclusive academic community is that we thrive together. And uplifting and supporting student parents and caregivers is part of that. It's the thriving now and for the future that you heard both Teresa and Brittany speak to in the 2-generation approach, and what the future holds when we center student parents at our institutions. Thank you, Batania.
Thank you, Joyce Ann. And I'm going to stick with you for the next question, the next panel question. With your experience at George Mason, can you share some specific examples of stories of how you supported student parents and what the effect has been from that? And what is the impact of Common App data on your efforts?
Absolutely. I think the beginning of that story, the beginning of that question about stories, I think I have a whole Rolodex, I feel like, of these amazing students doing amazing things. But in the context of today's webinar, I'll start with Mason's engagement with the data from Common App. I think that might be the biggest story to start with because it fuels a lot of the other stories. We all know there's power in data. We get a clearer picture of who our students are so we can better meet their needs, serve our students. About 90% of first years apply to Mason via Common App, but there are other pathways to apply to Mason. So our admissions team worked to gather the same data across all those pathways to ensure consistency in a complete data set, which is of course important for us. And Betania mentioned the very kind of top of the funnel, those account creators to those who submitted an app. And at Mason, we kind of followed that funnel down, of course, and looked at how those applicants were kind of moving through to the admit and the deposit stage. And our transfer student parents are actually moving into that deposit stage from admit at a better rate than anywhere else in the funnel. That was important and interesting, as you might imagine. But another important part for us as we worked with the registrar to create an optional form that allows students to update their student parent status at any point in their educational journey. It was paramount for us to get that data on the application, but then to know that that is not the only place that we need to allow that data to be updated or changed as the student is moving through their journey with us here at Mason. And the question kind of focused on effects, and I'll say that we also looked at kind of our NESI data and national data for that too, and knowing that the time spent providing care, and granted in that space we're not just talking about care for minors, but we're talking about care, but the time spent providing care doubles in that data from a first year to a senior. And that was impactful for us too. And so the effects in all of that, and with our partnership with Common App, is that we're doing better at tracking and knowing who our students are and what they need. And this puts us in a position to intentionally and purposefully amplify the student parents and caregivers, as well as positioning us for opportunities like grants and the Family Youth Seal.
Thank you. And speaking of that, I'd love to hear from Brittany how she answers this question.
Yes, of course. And thank you, Dr. Rogers. I think you said this with the first question, how our answers, our responses to these questions will be building off of each other, because we do work together closely in this community to support parenting students. And in your statement, you have highlighted, you have highlighted the Family U opportunity with Generation Hope quite a bit. And so I was originally prepared to give you some student experience and some direct services that our students have benefited from here at Generation Hope. But I really want to hone in the way in which our Family U cohort has been able to utilize the data from Common App. And I do want to do a little bit of level setting here. In case you are not familiar, you may be asking yourself, what is the Family U cohort? Well, this particular cohort is a comprehensive, customized, evidence-based 2-year capacity building experience designed to build and refine institutional competencies to improve student parent success on college campuses. In partnership with institutional staff and student parents, our colleges and universities participate in peer learning convenings and campus-focused independent coaching sessions. Generation Hope has launched now 3 Family U cohorts since 2021. And it's comprised of institutions from all over the nation that are leading the way in innovative supports for parenting students. Now, where does Common App come in with all of this? The impact of the data from Common App has now further shaped our efforts by providing the insights into the growing number of student parents in higher education. And as you've heard from my co-panelist here, Dr. Rogers, our institutions have been able to take that data and continue to have innovative policy and systemic change that support parenting students on their college campus. And so if I may, Batanya, I would be remiss if I did not shout out all of the other Family Youth schools that are also Common App member institutions. And so I want to give a special shout out, of course, to George Mason University, who is here on the panel with us, but also Trinity Washington University, Norfolk State University, Jackson State University, Southern University of New Orleans, Metropolitan State University in Denver, and University of New Mexico. We have, as you have heard, several institutions that we will be able to grow and support and garner great things by using this Common App data that has availed itself to us.
Thank you so much, Brittany, and thank you for calling out and shouting out those Common App members. We're excited about the work that our schools are doing to support student parents. We want to make sure that Common App gives you the opportunity to do that in a more comprehensive way, for our members to do that in a more comprehensive way. And I love the thought that organizations such as yourselves and colleges such as yourselves are using Common App data to help support these students. I did want to see if Teresa had any thoughts on this question. Yeah, Teresa.
I really appreciate that. I appreciate everything that Josanne and Brittany have shared, and thinking about that story from the institutional standpoint. I think that we also want to, and we are continuing to anchor in the story of individual students. And I know that we can tell, heartwarming stories about where students went back to school in really difficult times in their lives and got the support that they needed, and were able to excel. But I always think of one person who I spoke with, he was a really interesting story, where he was a student father who had been and he attends a Common App institution, for what it's worth, and he had been a union sprinkler head fitter. He had a good job out of high school, and was taking college classes at the local community college here and there for many years. Eventually, 8-9 years later, he finally got an associate's degree because he'd just been dabbling, and he realized that he really liked school and he wanted to go further, and he had a good job and he had a wife and he had kids, but he realized that he wanted to push himself further. So he applied for the flagship university in his state, and was able to enter that college and achieved a bachelor's degree and went on and got a master's degree. And now he works for the university as the coordinator of their transfer center. And what's interesting about his story is that he talks very saliently about how if you looked at just the earnings that he made, you wouldn't call him a success story. He was doing well in his union, labor job, but from a fulfillment standpoint, from his ability to engage with his family, from whether it's navigating the COVID pandemic, whether it's helping his child navigate mental health challenges, he talks really well about how the education and the opportunity to be able to get support and continue as a parent has made him a more holistic person, a better father, and a real champion for higher education. And I think that the more that we hear these stories of people who not only succeeded from an economic and academic standpoint, but who feel like they were able to pass along better lives to their children and more fulfillment in their own lives, to me, that really strikes at the heart of why we want to support students and why it's important to recognize them within our institutions.
Thank you, Teresa. And that just amplifies the point that making it easier for student parents to go to school for higher education is not just supporting that one student. You're literally supporting a family and their upward mobility. So it speaks to the importance of the work that you're doing. We're going to move to the third question, and we'll start with Brittany for this last question. What can be done to support student parents? What strategies can colleges implement or work toward?
I think with Tanya, so much can be done, but do I have space to share? I hope that as much information as we have shared here today, me and my co-panelists, I hope that we have also created a system and a culture for advocacy. And I think of the things that I could highlight, I do want to center advocacy at the core. Advocacy as a key to driving systemic change in your spaces, advocacy to use the data that has availed itself to you, but also advocacy extending beyond the campus to influence broader education and even social policies as it impacts the students that you are supporting on your campus. Here at Generation Hope, for example, we advocate for federal, state, and institutional policies, but we are looking at it with a lens to dismantle the burden on parenting students and help them to access and complete their degrees in higher education. And so just like that, I would say, that colleges could collaborate with organizations just like Generation Hope to champion student-parent needs being addressed and ensuring that policymakers understand the unique challenges that this population face. I believe that through strong advocacy efforts and implementing supportive policies on campus, colleges can not only improve retention and graduation rates for student parents, but also contribute to that long-term economic stability and success that we have been talking about throughout our questions today.
Thank you, Brittany. And yes, there are lots that we can do as student supporting organizations here at Common App, and I'm sure other ways that our members can help support these students. So yes, very, very important to advocate, to become advocates for our student parents. Teresa, would you like to contribute to this question?
This is a great question because often what first comes to mind when we talk about student parents is childcare. And childcare is very important, but only about half of student parents have children under the age of 6. And not that children over 6 don't need childcare, but it looks a little bit different than what we think about for younger children. Childcare is also really expensive and complicated and extraordinarily important, but there are many things that institutions can be doing that are not so complicated, that would make a big difference for students to be able to succeed in higher education. In 2021, right at the end of 2021 and into 2022, the Urban Institute convened a project called Student Parent Families at the Center. And the idea of this project was to think about the many policy systems that student parent families sit in the middle of. So that's both, college access and success policies, federal financial aid, employment in the labor market. About 70% of student parents are working in non-work study jobs. It relates to social safety net programs, tax benefits and programs, of course, the child care system itself, the K-12, public K-12 education system, infrastructure. Anyhow, I'm listing them all, but there's we counted 11 large policy areas that are intersecting in student parents' experiences. And higher education institutions don't have to do all those things themselves to support student parents, but thinking about strategies across this policy system that are supportive of parents who are pursuing education pathways, that are pursuing who are pursuing intergenerational economic mobility, makes a lot of sense. And colleges can be a hub for trying to create spaces that are supportive. So all that said, we have a link that we will drop in our chat here for the Student Parent Families at the Center project. And I also want to share a publication that we put together in partnership with Leadership Council that had 45 leading thinkers from the field, as well as many of whom either were current or had been parenting students themselves and had that lived expertise. And many of the opportunities in our roadmap for change to support pregnant and parenting students are really not that hard. Creating a syllabus statement that gives students information about their rights under Title IX or information about where to get supports if they are pregnant or parenting is not complicated. You have to have the right buy-in, but it's not a hard thing to do. It doesn't cost additional money. It's about coordination and support. The Family Friendly Campus Toolkit is a free and accessible resource that's put out by PIRG Learning that colleges can go through on their own to be able to assess their own family friendliness. It's a great resource. Partnerships with human services and other programs. There's many things. I suggest that folks take a look at that publication. We're also going to be creating a kind of a searchable version of it very shortly. One of the big areas, though, that was identified as sort of a critical first step is data collection. And that's where this Common App data asset is really valuable. So as I mentioned in our legislative overview, many states have been passing requirements that colleges track the parenting status of their students. But it's not always clear how to do that. That's only in a smattering of states. And then once you collect the data, how do you use that in a way that actually helps support student well-being and actually take those data to action, which was the motivation for our Data to Action campaign to support to support parenting students, which we can also drop the chat both for our overall project page, drop the link for overall project page and for our publications and events page, which has resources for colleges to be thinking about how to understand their student parent population better and to use those data in helpful ways. I think that there's, if you don't count or understand or recognize your student parent population, it's impossible to serve them, especially proportionately to need and in response to their actual characteristics. So to me, it's an obvious first step. It's not sufficient, but it is necessary. And Common App's data, both the existing through the first year application and then the upcoming data that'll be available through the transfer application, will be a really valuable resource for colleges to have in a very low barrier to entry type of way.
Thank you, Teresa. Brittany, would you like to follow up on that? I'm sorry, Josanne, would you like to follow up on that?
Sure, Betania, thank you. I think I'm going to take a little more of like an action item approach to this one and give you an example, a couple examples from Mason, as you might imagine I would do, right? So in my introduction, I introduced myself as the Director of Contemporary Student Services. We don't have an office for student parents, an office for off-campus, an office for. We honor the intersectionality of our students and understand, as you heard Teresa and Brittany speak to so eloquently, the intersectionality of student parents, and knowing that how we do that is important and intentional, and being innovative in doing that. So Contemporary Student Services at Mason serves not just student parents, but we serve military veteran connected students, off-campus students, transfer students, student parents and caregivers, of course, foster care alums, system impacted students, online learners. As you can imagine, if you go back and think about that list, how many of those would describe the other identities held by a student parent? Many of them, right? And Teresa's data and Brittany's data and Tania's data backed that up. So taking that intentional approach in serving those students in that way. But also knowing that partnering and connecting across colleagues and organizations is incredibly important. Common App has been a great partner and support to be more equitable and to stay abreast of current trends when it comes to the application process. Brittany mentioned that Mason was a Family U cohort member and is now a SEAL awardee, working with Family U. Also, and Generation Hope, also a really great partnership, but you never know who or where your sharing might go and impact. In preparing for this webinar and Brittany and Teresa, Betania and I having a conversation, what we figured out is that I learned that Common App had the student parent questions from a connection through Ascend, from Aspen Institute, from a connection made there and talking to the University of Michigan. I mentioned that and Teresa's like, hey, I think they know that because I let them know that because we had a conversation. And so it was this beautiful kind of full circle thing. You're like, this is why it's important. This is why things like this webinar, and the different convenings and conversations that happen in that sharing is so vitally important. And back to that point that I cannot drive this home enough is that we don't and can't do this work alone. So that action item of making sure you're having those conversations with your colleagues and making those connections and attending webinars and things like this to do that, but also having student parents and caregivers at the table and participating always. When you're talking about strategy, when you're talking about policy, working with them for them is incredibly impactful. Not just at the beginning or not just at the table, but truly participating in that process. And I think all of us can also attest to our student parents aren't going to hold back. They'll let you know. They don't have time not to let you know. Their time is incredibly valuable and at a high priority. And so they will participate and let you know in the best ways, in the best learning. But also doing an internal audit with a student parent lens and using some of those resources that Teresa spoke to and that Brittany spoke to in doing that and looking what would it look like to walk into your department, to walk into your school, to go to orientation, or to have a sneak peek day. If you were bringing your kiddos along, what would that look like? Would a student parent see themselves in your materials? Would a student parent find a welcome environment? Would a lactating parent find a lactation map quick and easy to be able to make sure that they could navigate the day as they needed to? Those are all really big kind of internal audits that you can do as an action item yourself that aren't, it's not a giant committee and change management. It's starting with the what does it look like? It'll get to the bigger things, of course. But doing those kind of audits and having student parents part of that process too is an important action item, I think, for institutions and a first great step forward. I'll pass it back to you, Tanya.
Thank you, Joyce-Ann. And one thing I want to say is I 100% agree that having student parents at the table is so important. This year, Common App worked with Generation Hope and Brittany to convene a focus group of student parents to really help us understand some of the barriers they may see in the application process. We're able to get a start of some good information there to help us grow. And right now, Common App is exploring ways to strengthen our support for student parents and make it easier for them to get from account creation to application submission. We're currently using our data to better understand parenting student behavior in the application and identify areas to best support them. Thinking about going to find areas where they may struggle. We launched our Transfer Resource Center that you see on your screen this past year. Part of that is in response to some of the things that we had been hearing from student parents that tended to be barriers to their to them even thinking about going to college. One of the things is connecting them with resources that shows schools that offer flexible coursework. But we also have a parent and parenting section on that resource center that speaks to, that connects them with childcare resources. We recognize that childcare is one of the top reasons that students struggle in going back to college. We also connect them to a resource that helps them navigate their Title IX rights. We find that students are unaware of their Title IX rights and how that impacts their success in school. There was one story that I heard from one of the Generation Hope members where she was not aware of her Title IX rights and was really forced to take her exam during her labor. Which we thought is, you would think that's outrageous, but it happens. And there's legislation to help guard against that. So we want to make sure those students know this. We aim to continue partnering with you and with other organizations in support of student parents. Just as we work to help all of these students as part of our mission and our vision reach their higher education goals. With that, I'd love to open this up to questions from you, and hopefully we can get some answers for you. I'll start with the first question. I heard, and this is from one of our attendees, I heard you mention veterans as being a larger part of this. I wonder if we also have a large population of spouses of veterans as well. And I am going to, well, I can start by saying that we do have veterans in our first year application as well as our Common App for transfer. Yes, they tend to be independent students, meaning they are over, they're 25 and over, they are supporting themselves, and many of them do have children. We have not, I have not had spouses separated out of that group. Right now, we combine spouses and dependents as one group, and that's something that was a choice. And something that we definitely can revisit. Brittany, Teresa?
I'm happy to comment on that briefly, but Tanya, I just appreciate the flag on the focus on veterans, because I think that you're right, military connected families are very much a common population in this kind of student parent space. So as Batanya mentioned, I also don't have good information about spouses of veterans, but I do know that based on the latest data, 45% of veteran undergraduate students are parents. So almost half of all veteran undergrads are parenting. And then I think that if you, which is about 286,000 students nationwide, and if you were to expand that to include all of the military connected families, particularly spouses, you would be looking at a pretty large and important population in higher ed. So I always like to throw data at a question because I think that it helps emphasize the salience of that group and why this is important.
Thank you, Teresa. Anyone else want to address that question?
I'll add into that. So the other thing in thinking about that and thinking about that data too is looking at veterans who are using benefits, veteran spouses who are using transferred benefits, and how all of that works together is another kind of layer to that data that you'd want to look at and think about too, and how that impacts that journey for a veteran student, a veteran connected student parent.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to a different question. Unless, Brittany, did you have any insight on that question as well? All right. So since some students may be nervous about revealing their parenting students in the application process, is it wise to ask the question? And I will throw that out to the group and start with, it looks like, Joyce-Ann.
I think any of us could probably start with this, and I think we all would have the first answer is yes. always ask the question, always give the opportunity to identify. And I'll go back to the Mason specific example, and then Teresa and Brittany, you can speak to the broader. But we knew that perhaps not everyone would be comfortable disclosing, and we still see that. We still have students. Just last year in spring, I had a student pull me aside and, can I tell you something? And quite literally whispering to me in the corner of an event that they just found out they were pregnant. They're like, my mom and my husband know, nobody else knows. What is this going to look like? It's going to totally disrupt my grad program. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, right? Because it starts to spiral for them. But yes, always asking the question, but I mentioned the voluntary form that we have that allows students at any point in their journey to update that status if they wish, or when it changes and they know that it's there. One, because we know student parent status can change overnight, but two, coming into the comfort or the bravery to say out loud that and identify to the institution that they are student parents, that they're comfortable doing that in our spaces, which is beautiful when that happens. Sad when we realize it wasn't from the beginning, but it's always a work in progress. But yes, and is I think the answer to that.
I will say, oh, go ahead, Brittany. Did you have, I didn't want to cut you
No,
off.
I'm going to agree. I was just going to agree with Joyce, and I think we talked a little bit about, and I think this was Joyce saying, really kind of honed in on, like, are your students seeing themselves on campus? I think a part of asking the question is to build that data presence and that data collection for the institutional stakeholders and administration, but also I think, and I'm speaking in part from my own personal experience, a part of students' hesitation to disclose their parenting status is because sometimes, and this was just a few years ago in undergrad when I did not see myself, I did not see other parenting students on my campus. And so I think, when you make it a concept that supports belonging, honestly, on the campus, you belong here. And not only do you belong here, but we want to build out specific supports for you. I think then the message is a little bit clearer, and you have students that feel more comfortable to come forth and disclose their parenting status. So I just echo Joyce saying yes, and right, yes, ask the question, but know that there is work that comes behind asking that question for sure.
Yeah, and I was just going to drive home. So make the question voluntary, don't require it. Be clear about why you're asking to the extent that you can include some language. Sometimes you don't have a lot of space for that on the application, but as Brittany points out, if you can indicate that there are certain kinds of supports for students who have different considerations, whether it's parenting, whether it's having a disability, whether it's having being a veteran, that are potentially sensitive statuses that people are routinely asked as part of enrollment in higher ed, so that people understand why you're asking. And the third is non-discrimination statements can matter a lot. So if students are reassured that providing that information is not going to impact their likelihood of admission or their status as a student, or and having some policies at the institutional level that protects them, and making those really clear, as well as Brittany mentioned, the overall kind of tenor of family-friendly campus, all of that increases the likelihood that people are going to want to disclose, and that the college can be responsive and responsible in using that information to support their success. We do see a pattern over time. I don't know about at admission, but I do know that in repeated student parent data collection rounds, when it's, because this is a status that can change when colleges kind of ask questions to update it each year, over time, the level of response increases as students build more trust in the institution about why they're asking, and that it's actually going to be used for something that's valuable to them.
Thank you, Teresa. I think we have time for one additional question. the question that I have is, there was a question in the FAFSA that helped to measure parenting students. And there is a question in the Better FAFSA as well that talks about parenting students. What are the limitations and the opportunities from that question?
Oh, I would really love to take this only because happy to share the link to a blog post I just put out about exactly this issue, which is titled "Colleges Will Need New Data Collection Efforts to Identify Parenting Students After Changes to Financial Aid Forms." So maybe that summarizes the thesis, which is that the FAFSA had a question that asked about students with minor dependent children. Dependent was a little narrowly defined. It's a kind of analogous to how it's done on tax records, not 100%, but very close to it. And only about 60% of students actually complete a FAFSA form. So it was always partial, but better than nothing, and you know, a useful place to start. The new financial aid forms don't, first of all, there's only a checkbox about whether you have any dependents, regardless of age, which wouldn't be a big problem in itself, because I think it was like 92% of students who had dependents had dependent children. So it was like pretty high portion, but not everyone gets that question because of the skip logic in the FAFSA application now. So a large portion of students who are determined as financially independent because of other responses they gave aren't even getting that question. And so we will see, because this is all rolling out right now on the back end, what kind of information financial aid offices have access to. But the way that they're backfilling that information is from tax records. The tax records that are being linked to the financial aid data are 2 years lagged and have additional privacy protections on them that have not been entirely sorted out about how that information can be used to support student well-being. So all of that goes to FAFSA is going to be and is already less of a source of insight. And so looking at things like application data or other unique data collection efforts is going to be increasingly important to be able to identify parenting student population. And I put this link in the speaker chat, but if you all can put it into the everyone chat, that would be great. Oh, perfect. You did that. Thank you, Taylor. Sorry.
All right. Any other insight on that question?
I think another level of speaking to kind of, as Teresa mentioned, the incompleteness of that data is looking at, if we took at Mason, we looked at the number of the FAFSA estimate and what percentage of our population that was, and knowing that was really low comparatively, especially when we looked at the last round of NASI data for us and looking at that providing care question, again, knowing that not the full percentage was necessarily talking about minors or children, but there was a 27-point difference. Like, it was big. It was a very wide change in who was identifying that they were providing care versus who was checking those boxes on the FAFSA.
Thank you. So I feel like this has been a great conversation. And I certainly appreciate having all of you here to talk to our members about this important group of students that, and oftentimes because the data isn't collected in a broader way, a more comprehensive way, or they're often overlooked. So hopefully we can start these conversations. We can look for additional ways to support these students. And I thank you all of our members who decided to join us. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I will see you next time.